The letter came on a Tuesday morning, tucked between a grocery flyer and a birthday card from her mother, and it changed everything before Elena Hart had even finished her first cup of coffee. Final notice. Foreclosure proceedings to begin in 30 days. She read it twice. Then a third time, standing barefoot on the cold kitchen tile, while her 6-year-old son Ben poured too much syrup on his pancakes, and her 9-year-old daughter Sophie argued about which socks matched. Outside, a September wind rattled the maple tree her husband's father had planted the year Daniel was born. The house that tree grew up in, the house Elena had raised her children in, the house that had been in the Hart family for 3 generations, was, according to a single sheet of paper from Fifth Union Bank, about to belong to someone else. She did not scream. She did not cry. She folded the letter along its original creases, slid it into her cardigan pocket, and told her children to hurry up or they'd miss the bus. Because Elena Hart had learned, over the past 6 months, that some fights are not won by shouting. Some fights are won in silence, in spreadsheets, in the quiet hours after midnight when everyone else in the house is asleep and no one is watching how hard you're working to save them. This is the story of that fight. Nobody in her family knew she was having it. By the time they found out, it was almost too late to matter, and almost enough to change everything. If you're new to this channel, welcome to Family Hidden Fight, where we tell the stories that happen behind closed doors, the battles nobody claps for. Stay until the end, because what Elena discovers in that final family dinner will make you rethink everyone you think you know. 6 months earlier, the Hart family had buried its patriarch. Richard Hart had built Hart & Sons Construction from a single pickup truck and a box of hand tools into one of the most respected contracting firms in Central Ohio. He was the kind of man who shook your hand and meant it, who remembered the names of every subcontractor's kids, who believed fiercely, old-fashionedly, that a family business was a sacred trust passed from father to son. He had 2 sons. Cole, the elder, golden-haired and quick with a joke, the one who'd always been groomed to take the company's helm. And Daniel, the younger, quieter, steadier, the one who actually showed up to job sites at 6 in the morning and stayed until the last nail was driven. Elena had married Daniel 11 years ago, back when he was just a foreman with calloused hands and a habit of humming old country songs under his breath while he worked. She had loved him for his steadiness long before she understood how rare that steadiness was in his family. Because the truth Elena had come to see slowly, the way you notice a crack in a foundation only after years of walking past it, was that the Hart family ran on appearances. And appearances, she was about to learn, could hide almost anything. At Richard's funeral, Margaret Hart, the family matriarch, stood between her 2 sons like a queen flanked by her court, and when the will was read 3 days later, everyone in the room understood exactly where her loyalty had always lived. Cole was named acting president of Hart & Sons Construction. Daniel was named vice president of operations, a title that sounded important and meant in practice that he ran the job sites while his brother ran the money. "It's what your father wanted," Margaret said, patting Daniel's hand the way you'd pat a disappointed child. "Cole has the head for numbers. You've always been better with your hands." Elena, sitting beside her husband in the lawyer's office, watched Daniel's jaw tighten and then release, the way it always did when he swallowed something rather than fight for it. She reached for his hand under the table. He squeezed back, grateful, unaware that his wife's mind had already begun doing what it always did, quietly, carefully, cataloging every detail that didn't add up. Because Elena Hart was not, by trade, a construction wife who spent her days at the salon. She had a degree in accounting she'd never quite used, shelved 8 years ago when Sophie was born, dusted off 2 years ago when she started keeping the books part-time for Hart & Sons to help out after Richard's diagnosis. She knew numbers. She knew how a legitimate business breathed the rhythm of invoices in, payroll out, materials ordered, jobs completed, profit banked. And within 2 months of Cole taking over as president, she began to notice the rhythm was wrong. It started small. A payment to a supplier, Ferris Building Materials, for $18,000 for a job that, as far as Elena could tell from the site logs, had only used about $6,000 of actual material. She mentioned it to Daniel over dinner, casually, the way you'd mention anything. Probably a bulk order for the next job, too, Daniel said, not looking up from Ben's math homework, which he was helping check. Cole handles procurement now. He knows what he's doing. Maybe, Elena said, and let it go. For now. 2 weeks later, there was a $15,000 consulting fee paid to a company Elena had never heard of, Meridian Strategic Partners, for what the invoice vaguely called business development services. She searched for Meridian Strategic Partners online. She found a website with a stock photo of a handshake, a phone number that rang to a generic voicemail, and an address that, when she looked it up on a map, turned out to be a self-storage facility on the outskirts of Dayton. Her stomach dropped. She sat at the kitchen table long after the kids were in bed, the laptop glow the only light in the room, and did what any careful person does when they find one crack in a wall. She started looking for others. She found them. Not many at first, a strange payment here, a round number that should have been odd, an invoice with a signature that looked like Daniel's but wasn't quite right if you looked closely, the pen pressure just slightly off, the loop of the D a fraction too tight. Over 3 weeks of quiet nights, after the dishes were done and the children were asleep, Elena built a spreadsheet. She titled it, with the kind of dark humor that gets you through fear, grocery list. If anyone ever found it on her laptop, they'd think she was planning a very strange dinner party. By early spring, the grocery list had a running total, $211,000 in payments that either didn't match any real service or were paid to companies that didn't seem to exist in any meaningful way, or were authorized with a signature that wasn't Daniel's, even though Daniel's name was the one on the line. She thought, at first, that she had to be wrong. Cole had always been reckless with money. Everyone in the family joked about it, the boat he couldn't afford, the Vegas trip after his divorce, the way he always seemed to need, a little help that Margaret always quietly gave him. But reckless was one thing. This was something else. This looked, to Elena's trained eye, exactly like what it was. A man draining a company through a web of shell payments while making sure his brother's name sat on the paperwork. She didn't sleep that night. She lay next to Daniel, listening to him breathe, and understood with a cold certainty that if she was right, her husband, the most honest man she'd ever met, was being set up to take the fall for his own brother's theft. The hardest part of fighting a hidden war is deciding whether to fight it alone. Elena's first instinct was to tell Daniel everything, that very night. But she thought of how he'd looked at his father's funeral, how he'd looked when Margaret handed the company to his brother without a second thought, how many years of quiet, unspoken hurt lived behind Daniel's easy smile. If she went to him with half-formed suspicion and no proof, she knew exactly what would happen. He would want to believe his brother. He would go to Cole, gently, the way Daniel did everything, and give him the chance to explain. And a man clever enough to build a scheme this elaborate would have an explanation ready. The evidence would vanish. And Elena would be the wife who'd caused a family war over nothing, or worse, over something true that she could no longer prove. She needed more before she could risk it. She needed proof strong enough that even Margaret, even in her favoritism, couldn't wave it away. So Elena did the only thing she knew how to do. She kept fighting in silence. She called her college roommate, Priya Nadir, who was now a forensic CPA in Cincinnati, and asked to meet for coffee on a Saturday when Daniel had the kids at his mother's for a visit. She didn't tell Priya everything over the phone. Some fears, she'd learned, you only say out loud once to someone you trust completely, in a place where no one else can hear. You understand what you're describing, Priya said quietly, after Elena laid the spreadsheet across the cafe table between them. Is check kiting or invoice fraud, and possibly both? If the company's books get audited by the bank, by the IRS, doesn't matter who, and Daniel's signature is on those authorizations, he is legally exposed, even if he never touched a dollar of it. I know, Elena said. Does he know you're doing this? Elena shook her head. Priya studied her for a long moment. Elena, if you're right, this isn't a family disagreement. This is fraud, and depending on how deep it goes, it could be a federal case. You need real documentation, bank records, the original signed authorizations, vendor confirmations, not just a spreadsheet you built from what you could see in QuickBooks. And you need to be very, very careful, because if this man knows you're looking, he will not just get sloppy. He might get dangerous. Not physically, maybe, but dangerous to you, to your marriage, to your name in that family. Elena nodded slowly. She thought of her children asleep in their beds, of the maple tree Richard Hart had planted, of 11 years of marriage built on trust she was now quietly, carefully, testing to its limits without her husband even knowing. Then I'll be careful, she said. But I'm not stopping. Priya reached across the table and squeezed her hand. Then I'm helping you. But Elena, you need a paper trail that protects you too. Everything you find, you email to yourself, time-stamped, from a personal account Cole has no access to. If this blows up, and it will, you need to be able to prove exactly when you knew what. That night, Elena created a new email account under a name no one in the family would recognize, her maiden name, Elena Voss, and began methodically sending herself proof. Spring became summer, and the hidden fight deepened. Elena kept doing the books, kept smiling at family dinners, kept nodding along when Margaret praised Cole's sharp instincts for growing the company. She learned to be an actress in her own life, laughing at Cole's jokes at Sunday dinner while cataloging, in the back of her mind, the new gray in his hair that she now recognized as stress, the way his eyes flicked to his phone every time it buzzed, the sheen of a man juggling debts he could not let anyone see. She learned things about her brother-in-law that broke her heart a little, even as they hardened her resolve. Through careful, quiet research, public records, an old debt collection notice she found stuffed in the office recycling bin that Cole had forgotten to shred, a mutual friend's offhand comment about Cole's rough year at the tables. She pieced together the shape of the truth. Cole had gambling debts, serious ones. He'd started small, a card game with buddies, and it had metastasized over 2 years into something that now had men calling his cell phone that were not, by any definition, patient creditors. He wasn't a monster. He was a drowning man who decided, when his father died and handed him a company instead of a lifeline, that he would rather bleed the family business than admit he needed help. That understanding didn't stop what he was doing. It just made Elena grieve for the family even as she prepared to save it. The closer she got to a full picture, the more dangerous her position became. In July, she was in the small back office of Hart & Sons on a Thursday afternoon, ostensibly reconciling payroll, when Cole walked in earlier than expected and found her scrolling through the vendor payment history on the company laptop. Looking for something? His voice was light. His eyes were not. Elena's heart hammered, but she had rehearsed calm for exactly this moment. Payroll discrepancy. Rodriguez crew says they're short 2 hours from last week, just tracking it down. Cole leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, watching her a beat too long. You've been spending a lot of time in these books lately, Elena, more than payroll usually needs. Somebody has to keep this company honest, she said, meeting his eyes and letting the sentence sit there, deliberately double-edged, watching to see if it landed. For half a second, something flickered across his face, not guilt exactly, but recognition, the look of a man realizing the ground under him might not be as solid as he'd assumed. Careful, he said finally, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Dad always said this family runs on trust. Wouldn't want anyone thinking you didn't trust your own family. It wasn't a threat. Not exactly. But Elena drove home that afternoon with her hands shaking on the steering wheel, and that night she made a decision. She could no longer investigate at the office. It was too dangerous, and Cole was now watching her. Whatever she needed next, she would have to find another way. That way arrived, unexpectedly, through Margaret. Elena had never been close with her mother-in-law. Margaret was a woman who measured love in usefulness and loyalty in obedience, and Elena, quiet, independent, unwilling to simply agree with everything, had never quite fit the mold of daughter-in-law Margaret had wanted. But Margaret also kept, in an old roll-top desk in her sunroom, 30 years of Richard's business files, because Richard Hart had never fully trusted computers and had insisted on keeping paper copies of every major company document, just in case. Elena began visiting Margaret more, under the guise of family closeness, bringing the kids over on weekends, helping her sort through Richard's things for grief, which was true, and also, quietly, an excuse to be near that roll-top desk. It took 6 visits before Margaret, worn down by a particularly difficult Sunday and 2 glasses of wine, finally asked Elena to help her go through Richard's old filing boxes before I lose my nerve to do it at all. And there, in a manila folder labeled simply RH, Co. AUTHORIZETONS, Elena found what she needed. The original signature cards Hart & Sons had on file with Fifth Union Bank, the true authorization limits Richard had set up years ago requiring 2 signatures. His, and per his written instruction, whichever son held the title of operations, for any company payment over $10,000. Every fraudulent payment on Elena's list exceeded $10,000. Every one of them bore what was supposed to be Daniel's signature, which meant, if Daniel hadn't actually signed them, and Elena now had 11 months of muscle memory of watching her husband sign school permission slips and mortgage documents, she knew his signature better than her own. Then someone had forged it. Repeatedly. Deliberately. To make it look like Daniel had authorized the theft of his own family's company. Elena sat on the floor of Margaret's sunroom, the folder open in her lap, and for the first time in 6 months of quiet investigation, she let herself cry. Not from fear. From the sheer, exhausting weight of finally having enough, she photographed every page. She emailed them to her Elena Voss account, and she called Priya that night from her car in the driveway before she'd even gone inside to face her family. "Have it," she said. "I have all of it." "Then it's time," Priya said. "Elena, it's time to tell Daniel." She told him on a Wednesday night, after the kids were asleep, at the kitchen table where 6 months ago she'd first read the foreclosure warning that, she now understood, was the bank's response to a business account so depleted it could no longer cover the mortgage Richard had once used company revenue to help pay down. She laid out the folder. The spreadsheet. 6 months of careful, patient, secret work. Daniel didn't speak for a long time. He turned the pages slowly, his jaw working the way it did when he was holding something in, and Elena watched 11 years of marriage sit silently across the table from her, waiting to see which way her husband would break. 6 months, he finally said, and his voice cracked on the words. "You've been carrying this for 6 months, alone." "I didn't have proof," Elena said softly. "I didn't want to accuse your brother of something this serious without being sure. And I didn't want you to have to choose between believing me and believing him before I could give you something undeniable. You should have told me." He wasn't angry, not really. She could hear that the words were less an accusation than a wound. "I could have helped you. You didn't have to do this by yourself." "I know," Elena said, and reached for his hand. "But Daniel, look at what he did. He forged your signature." If this had gone to a full audit, if the bank had called in fraud investigators, you would have been the name on every document. Not him. You. He built this so that if it ever came out, it would look like your crime, not his. She let that land. "I couldn't risk you going to him first, one brother to another. Giving him time to move money, shred files, cover his tracks better than he already had. I'm sorry I kept it from you. But I was protecting you the only way I knew how." Daniel sat with that for a long moment, staring at the folder, at his own forged name staring back at him from a dozen fraudulent authorizations. And then, slowly, something in his face shifted grief, yes, for the brother he was about to lose in every way that mattered, but underneath it, something that looked almost like awe. "You did all this," he said quietly, "and I had no idea. My whole life, I thought I was the steady one in this family, the reliable one." He shook his head. "You're the strongest person I have ever known, Elena, and I almost let my mother and my brother make you feel like you didn't matter in this family." They went to Priya together the next morning, and by the end of that week, they had what they needed: a full forensic accounting timeline, copies of the forged authorizations next to genuine samples of Daniel's real signature, and records tracing over $300,000. The number had grown, the deeper Priya dug, with professional access Elena hadn't had funneled through shell vendors, and ultimately into payments to 2 collection agencies clearly connected to gambling debt. The question was no longer whether Elena had proof. The question was how to use it without destroying the family entirely, and whether that was even still possible. Daniel wanted to go straight to the bank, to law enforcement, to end it cleanly. Elena, who had spent 6 months learning to think 3 steps ahead of a man desperate enough to forge his own brother's name, argued for something else. "If we go straight to the police," she said, "Cole panics, lawyers up, and this drags out for years while the company your father built, the company that pays for 40 families' mortgages through their jobs, collapses in the meantime. I think we need one more thing first. I think we need to give him a chance to face what he's done in front of the family before we take it outside the family. Not because he deserves mercy. Because your father's company, and everyone who depends on it, deserves the best chance at surviving this." It was, Priya said later, exactly the kind of clear-headed thinking that had let Elena survive 6 months undetected in the first place. So Elena did something that terrified her more than any spreadsheet ever had. She asked Margaret to host a family dinner. Just us, no excuses, everyone needs to be there, for the following Sunday. Margaret, sensing something serious in her daughter-in-law's voice for once, agreed without argument. The Sunday dinner started like every other Hart family dinner had for 11 years. Margaret's overcooked pot roast, Sophie and Ben squabbling over the last dinner roll, Cole cracking a joke about traffic on I-70 that got a dutiful laugh from everyone but Elena. She waited until dessert. She waited until the children, at Daniel's quiet suggestion, had been sent to the den to watch a movie. She waited until Margaret had settled into her chair at the head of the table with the particular satisfaction of a woman who believed her family, whatever its quiet tensions, was fundamentally intact. Then Elena set the folder on the table. "Need everyone to look at something," she said, and her voice, to her own surprise, did not shake. Cole's easy smile flickered, just for a second, the way it had in the office back in July. "What's this, Elena?" "Bringing work to Sunday dinner now. It's about the company," Elena said. "About where the money's been going for the last 8 months. Margaret's face tightened. "Elena, this isn't the place." "It's exactly the place," Elena said, gently but without backing down, "because everyone at this table has been told a story about who runs this family and who can be trusted with it, and I think everyone at this table deserves to know the truth before another dollar leaves that company." She opened the folder. She laid out the vendor payments to companies that didn't exist, the consulting fee to Meridian Strategic Partners and its self-storage unit address, the forged authorizations, page after page of Daniel's name, signed by a hand that was not his, laid directly beside genuine examples of his real signature, so the difference was unmistakable even to eyes that didn't know accounting. The trail Priya had traced to 2 collection agencies with a documented history of servicing gambling debt. The room went silent in a way Elena had never heard a room go silent before. "This is insane," Cole said, but his voice had lost its light, easy register. It came out thin. "You're accusing me of based on what a spreadsheet you put together in your spare time. This is a forensic accountant's job, Elena, not a bookkeeper's hobby." "It is a forensic accountant's job," Elena said steadily. "Which is why a forensic accountant did it. Priya Nadir, CPA, licensed in the state of Ohio. She's prepared to testify to every document in this folder, and she's already flagged this file for the bank's fraud division, because as of Friday, $311,000 has left this company's accounts under your authority, Cole, disguised with your brother's forged signature. She let the number sit in the air. That's not a bookkeeper's hobby. That's federal wire fraud, and it has your fingerprints, not Daniel's, no matter how carefully you tried to make it look otherwise. Margaret's face had gone pale, her eyes moving from the papers to her elder son and back again, searching for the denial she needed him to give her. "Cole," she said, and her voice, for the first time in Elena's 11 years of knowing her, sounded genuinely afraid. "Tell her she's wrong. Tell me she's wrong." And Cole, cornered, exposed, staring at a table full of evidence he had spent months making sure no one would ever find, did the thing that men like him, when finally out of options, so often do. He broke. "You don't understand what it's like," he said, and his voice cracked, all the easy charm gone, replaced by something raw and exhausted. "Dad hands me the company like it's a trophy and I'm supposed to just know how to run it. I was drowning before he even died, Mom. The tables, I owed people money that don't send polite letters when you're late. I didn't have a choice." "You had a choice," Daniel said quietly, and it was the first time he'd spoken since Elena opened the folder. His voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. "You had 100 choices, Cole. You could have told me. You could have told Mom. You could have told Dad before he died and let him help you the way he'd have wanted to. Instead, you chose to forge my name and let me be the one who took the fall if it ever came out. You didn't just steal from the company. You were willing to let it destroy me, my name, my marriage, maybe my freedom to protect yourself." Cole had no answer for that. He put his head in his hands, and for a long moment, the only sound in the dining room was Margaret's ragged breathing as 60 years of unshakable certainty about her golden son quietly came apart. What happened next, Elena would later say, mattered more than the confrontation itself. Because a hidden fight, once it comes into the light, doesn't automatically resolve into justice or forgiveness. It becomes a choice about what kind of family you want to be on the other side of the truth. Daniel, with Elena and Priya's guidance, made the decision that felt right to him. They would not go to the police, not yet. Instead, working with Priya and a business attorney, they restructured the company's authority so that Cole was removed entirely from any financial control. His name stripped from every bank signature card, replaced with Daniel's, and, at Daniel's insistence, Elena's, officially, for the first time, recognized as what she had already become. The person who actually understood how to keep this family's business honest. Cole was given a choice. Enter a structured repayment plan, cooperate fully with Priya's forensic accounting to help trace every dollar so the company could recover what could be recovered, and get real help. The kind of help he'd been too proud and too protected to ask for his whole life, for the addiction that had driven him to this. Or Daniel would take the folder to the bank's fraud division and let the law decide. Cole chose the first path. It would take him years, and it would cost him the title, the authority, and much of the easy affection his mother had always given him without question. But it was, Daniel said quietly to Elena that night, a chance, the only chance left for his brother to actually become a different man instead of just performing the role of a good one. Margaret's reckoning was quieter, but no less real. She never fully apologized in the dramatic way people sometimes do in the stories we tell about families. That wasn't who she was. But 3 weeks after that Sunday dinner, she showed up at Elena's house on a weekday afternoon, unannounced, and asked, stiffly, awkwardly, in a way that cost her visibly, if Elena would teach her how to actually read the company's financial statements. "So I understand what I'm looking at from now on, instead of just trusting whoever smiles the widest." It wasn't an apology. But from Margaret Hart, it was close enough to one that Elena let her in, put the kettle on, and spent the next 2 hours at her kitchen table teaching her mother-in-law, patiently, the difference between an invoice and an authorization. The same quiet, careful work that had saved this family without any of them even knowing it was happening. the foreclosure notice never became a foreclosure. With the fraudulent drain stopped and a structured plan to recover funds from Cole in place, the bank agreed to a 90-day forbearance while the company's finances stabilized. By winter, Hart & Sons construction was solvent again, smaller, humbler, but honest, for the first time in almost a year. Daniel took over as full president that January. But at the company's small internal announcement, standing in front of the same crew his father had once led, he did something no one expected. He asked Elena to stand beside him and told the room, plainly, that Hart & Sons would have ceased to exist without his wife's quiet, months-long work uncovering fraud that could have taken this company and this family down entirely, and that from that day forward, she would serve as the company's official director of finance, no longer helping out, but leading. Elena hadn't expected to cry in front of a room full of construction workers in hard hats. But she did, a little, when the whole crew, men who'd known her for years only as Daniel's wife, broke into applause. That night after the kids were asleep, Daniel found her on the back porch, looking out at the maple tree his father had planted, now bare-branched against a cold January sky. "You never once asked for credit," he said, sitting beside her. "6 months of carrying this alone, and you never once made it about you." "It was never about credit," Elena said. "It was about protecting this family, all of you, even Cole, honestly, though it took me a long time to see it that way." Daniel took her hand. "My father used to say a family business runs on trust. I think he was wrong, actually. I think it runs on somebody willing to do the hard, unglamorous, invisible work of protecting everyone else, even when nobody's watching, even when nobody says thank you. That's what you did. That's what you are." He looked at her, and there was nothing in his eyes but 11 years of love, deepened now by something new, a kind of respect that comes only from truly seeing someone for the first time. "You were fighting for this family every single day, and I didn't even know the war was happening." Elena leaned her head against his shoulder and looked out at the tree, its branches bare but its roots, she knew now, deeper and stronger than anyone had ever given them credit for. "That's what hidden fights are," she said softly. "You don't do them for anyone to see. You do them because the people you love are worth it, whether they ever find out or not. If this story moved you, remember, the strongest people in your family are often the quietest ones, the ones fighting battles you never see, in the hours you're asleep, for a family that doesn't even know it's being saved. If you know someone like Elena, tell them. And if you're the one carrying a hidden fight of your own right now, you're not alone. Subscribe to Family Hidden Fight for more stories of the battles that happen behind closed doors. Which part of Elena's story hit you the hardest? Tell us in the comments below.